Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Dogs Do Speak podcast. Today, we do not have the wonderful Samantha Wayland, but she will be back. Please hit the subscribe button so you do not miss any of the content that we put out. Please, please, please. Today, we've got Lottie Bennett, and Lottie does a lot of amazing work. She's going to introduce herself very, very shortly. And then after that, we're going to kick in how we can support deaf dogs and the work that goes into working with dogs that are deaf in order to help them how to navigate their world. So, hello, Lottie, and welcome to Dogs Do Speak. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much.
Good, good, good. Could you introduce yourself for those that are watching? Just explaining who you are and what it is you actually do and how you got into the industry.
Yeah, I got into dog training about 2008. I think I started doing sort of doing it as a job, if you like, and started to. I think 2008 was when I started my own, and I was helping people like volunteering and stuff before that. I actually never planned for that at all. It was my first dog that got me into it. She was quite a handful, and I made a lot of mistakes with her when she was a puppy, following pretty poor advice. And I had a lot of work to do to make it up to her. So I got into things that way, and then ended up doing a lot of fostering and failed fostering and working with dogs that had different issues and stuff. Since then, basically, I've done. I've set up as a local dog trainer, been through a process of doing that, and moved on to online stuff instead. So now I exclusively work online and remotely with people.
So when we look at dogs that are, I would say, socially challenged. I would say being deaf, it does make you socially challenged environmentally. How do you work with these dogs? What work? I mean, I personally wouldn't have a clue where to start. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it you would do? And if I came to you as a client and say, I would like you to help me, my dog cannot hear, what type of things would you be saying and helping them? How would you help them to support them?
Okay, so different dogs have very different challenges with being deaf, and some dogs actually have very few challenges. I myself got into deaf dogs when I got a puppy that was born deaf, and she knew no different. So yes, we did have a few challenges in that respect, but it was probably more of a struggle for me than it was for her. Sometimes I think I have seen dogs adapt very well to becoming deaf, but I sometimes think that must be more of a challenge than, being born deaf. So it would depend a lot on the challenges that you're facing, and remembering as well that actually dogs, they do use sound, but it's not they're not a spoken language animal. So a lot of it is their physical, their body language and scent and things like that they don't actually need their hearing for. So we do obviously see a lot of challenges in deaf dogs, and a lot of things that tend to be linked. Obviously, correlation isn't causation, but you see a lot of shadow chasing and things like that. Might be because you see a lot of border collies and that type of dog that are deaf. But we do tend to see those kind of things. And so there is sort of some links to things like that, which are more challenging. But in general, a lot of dogs that are deaf don't really have a lot of social challenges with each other. You see things more like taken by surprise, the link, because they're much more visual as a result of being deaf, links to visual stimuli and things like that. So it would very much depend on, my first thing to say would be that they're a dog first, they're deaf second.
Okay. You sort of touched on something which I didn't really think about. We have dogs that can be born with no hearing, and we
Mhm.
have dogs that are born with hearing, but they can lose their hearing at some stage of their life. Do you see a difference between those two?
Um, Again, I don't know that I see enough of
Hmm.
each to know that there's a actual causation difference.
Hmm.
I think in my own experience, I would say that obviously there's more adaptation needed for a dog that goes deaf, and that would depend on their age as well as to when it happens and how deaf they go. You know, I've had dogs that have gone deaf in old age, but they've not gone completely deaf, and that's much harder than actually being completely deaf,
Yeah.
because they can hear some things but not where they're coming from or what they are, and that kind of thing. I've seen dogs that have gone deaf through very suddenly through surgery, for example, at a bit of a younger age, that actually adapt so fast, and do very, very well. But the main thing is that dogs that are born deaf have never relied on their hearing. People have never relied on them being able to hear. So for my Bubble, who was born deaf, she could actually lip read because I had hearing dogs as well. So I was always giving them cues at the same time, and she associated them. And I always say to people, talk to deaf dogs anyway, because they love to see your face move, and Um, but she didn't ever rely on hearing anything. So obviously, you have a dog that's relied on hearing before, and it's more that you've not. Some owners, some do, some don't, haven't taught a visual sign language to them, and then suddenly there's no way of communicating that with them.
That, everything you just said there makes perfect sense. You know, if a dog is born without hearing, then that is natural to them.
Yeah.
It, they can learn anyway, which so long as we're aware of making things a little bit more clarity, giving it a bit more clarity. So, would you say that okay, regardless of whether it's genetics or whether the dog has just gone deaf, yeah, would you say working and teaching them new cues is equally as easy for both? Now, that might sound silly to some, but a dog that has been born not hearing, that's normal, that's natural. And a dog that has all of a sudden lost their hearing, that may make them feel a little bit, I don't know, uncomfortable emotionally. Something's gone wrong and they don't understand. Um,
Mm,
but would you say they could both learn new cues quite easily?
yeah, I think so. Obviously, dogs that have been born deaf, they have a different way of looking at things. They I mean, with Bubble, you could change a sign. Like, some people couldn't ask her to do things because the sign was so specific to her. And if they didn't sign it quite right, she was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
She could differentiate, you could do signs that were very, very close, and she could differentiate them very, very quickly. Um, that's because that's what she'd done all her life, picking up those tiny, details. And dogs are very good at that. They do it with each other anyway. They are good at picking up visual details. But I think possibly dogs that, it depends on the education they've had as well. If I had a dog now, so I don't have a deaf dog now, but if my current dog went deaf, she would be fine because we teach everything with hand signals anyway. And so if I then wanted to teach her stuff with hand signals without the verbal, she wouldn't struggle because she's had that education. I think a lot of it is the previous education that they've had rather than their innate ability.
Like you make perfect sense there, which sort of making me think this end. It's a very good idea to actually teach our dogs, deaf or otherwise, yeah, hand signals with clarity so that if we were, I don't know, have a sore throat, we can still carry on with our daily lives. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
so you've now given me the understanding that, funny enough, I always use hand signals. Whatever I teach, it's got a hand signal to go with that cue, that verbal cue. But I never looked upon it like that. For me, it was just something I did. Yeah.
I think
Some,
it's really natural for a lot of trainers because it's fading out a lure or whatever, And as people, we do use our hands a lot anyway.
yeah.
But yeah, so some people don't realise that they've done it. And I think with the hearing dogs that I've had, they've been much better at responding to hand signals than verbal cues alone. So hand signals on their own, they can respond to very well. Hand signals and verbal cues together, they're fine. But you ask for a verbal cue on its own, and they struggle more with that. They're not a language, a spoken language animal.
As my dog has laying down beside me, you were more or less talking about him.
Yeah.
And he's a hearing dog. Give him
Yeah.
a hand cue, carries it out quickly. I speak to him, he just looks at me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It must be a lot harder for them to differentiate spoken words than body language, because they are body language experts.
Okay, so let's just say, someone's made contact with you, Lottie, and they are not quite sure if their dogs are deaf, but they've got a feeling something is not right there. What advice would you give them for them to get to a definitive that, yes, my dog is deaf or not?
Okay. For most, I don't know whether this works for all deafness. Unfortunately, I didn't check, but for like congenital deafness, especially, I'm not sure if it works. I think it would work for dogs that have gone deaf. There's the Behaviour test, which is the brainstem auditory evoked response. And that is the only definitive way to test how much hearing your dog has. So that will tell you the level, that it will give you like a test result that I don't understand at all, with squiggly lines all over it, for each ear, and tell you what level of hearing. Somebody will be able to, explain it to you, what level of hearing each ear has. And it's done by putting tiny electrodes that are like acupuncture needles. They really, when done on puppies, they don't know about it. And just delivering a signal, and it tells you the brain's response to it, and what the dog can tell, can hear. So that's done on routinely done on most breeds that are prone to deafness, as puppies. So my Bubble, she was a Dalmatian, and a percentage of those are born deaf. And that's linked with American Bulldogs and Collies and things like that. It's the lack of pigment in the coat. So they are routinely tested by decent breeders. And that would be the way, that would be the only definitive way. But most of the time we get people coming to us in the Deaf Dog Network, for example, who don't know, and they just will do, the vet will do some like very basic tests with noise, or they will do some testing at home and just see what the dog can respond to, really. But obviously you don't know for sure, and you don't know which ear, if it's one ear or both, which is useful to know because of the direction that you can call the dog from, or what hazards might be around.
So basically, it's going to the vet. They either get referred from the vet to a specialist, I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
And then all those things you just talked about would then take place.
Yeah.
So once they have,
You can go for your own. There's people who do the testing that you can contact yourself. You don't
okay,
even have to be referred. So
okay. So once they've got that definitive answer, yes, this is what's causing this, blah 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 blah, and they would like to help and support their individual dog to navigate their environment a little bit better now. How does that start? How do we get into being able to teach a dog to what's the word? Yes, they're going to have more visual. That's going to take over from the hearing. That visual sense is going to grow. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
But how do we introduce the hand signals? Let's say for a dog that's never been trained before or had any form of training.
Okay. So something that I do, most of the stuff that I do with deaf dogs, I do with hearing dogs as well, because it's just beneficial. It could happen. Any dog can lose their hearing, but also it all works with hearing dogs. So why not? What we first suggest is just teaching a check-in, which again, I do with hearing dogs all the time. So anytime that that puppy or dog turns and looks at you, it gets praise and a reward. You find that they just start to look at you all the time. And that starts off your recall. It starts off being able to give them any kind of cues, anything like that. All you need to be able to train a deaf dog is for it to be able to look at you and have a reward that it likes. And then it's just exactly the same with, whether you're capturing, whether you're luring. Having quick responses is important. You obviously can't use a clicker. You can't use your voice. So you can use hand signals, as maybe thumbs up, or some people do that. I even had a little tiny flashlight that's only lit up when you press the button, and if you released it, it turned off again. And that was Bubbles' flicker. You have to be very careful that they're not light sensitive dogs, or going to go chasing lights and stuff. But you're not actually holding the light and moving it around. It's just literally lighting it up. To mark very quick behaviours. But basically, as long as you can find a way of marking it, you're doing exactly the same as you would with a hearing dog. You're teaching them that a thumbs up means food. You're teaching them that looking at me gets you a thumbs up and food. And you can start just on a completely force-free, choice-based way of every time you look at me, something great is going to happen. And then you've got a dog that wants to look at you all the time, and it's dead easy to teach them something.
Yeah, well, once food's introduced to most dogs, they don't stop looking.
Yeah, that can be a bit of a challenge, teaching check-ins and stuff, because you can't get them to look away to get them to look back again. But generally, that's when you can move into a slightly more distracting environment and, make the most of them being looking away and looking back. You can also do all the same stuff that you do. So, the type of pattern games where you throw a treat away, and that sets them up again to look back at you. So
Yeah, it's like a reset.
yeah,
They go away to collect, and then they're obviously going to look back naturally. When's the next one going to be
yeah,
delivered?
yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
get it. So let's just say we are. Have you ever had anyone that's come to you or ask you for that recall? Because I personally am thinking that the further a dog is away from us, yeah, that is, you know, lacking in hearing, or can't hear, whatever. How do we get that dogs to respond back to us? How do we get a good recall from that?
A lot of people are very wary of letting deaf dogs off the lead,
Mhm.
and doing any recall. And obviously, we're now in a much better position these days where there's a lot of secure fields and things. So I'd always start with something like that. But actually, deaf dogs can have excellent recall because they can very often be much more Velcro. They know they can't hear you if they go off, and they can't necessarily find you again. So they very often will keep you in sight. There are dogs. I mean, Bubble was not a Velcro dog, bless her heart. She was so confident. And I actually put a bell on her so that I knew where she was when she was in the undergrowth disappearing off. So you basically would keep them, you start off with either a long line if you need to, secure field, whatever, and keep doing that check-in at that distance. You don't let them go too far to begin with, and keep rewarding and try and teach them that invisible bungee rope that they get so far and they look back. And it is kind of just rewarding that as soon as you start to reward that check-in, they're coming back anyway for their reward. It is important that you consider your environment. If you've got a deaf dog, and a lot of hearing dogs as well, if they get a distraction, they're not necessarily going to think to look back at you. The same goes for a hearing dog. If there's something very distracting, their ears turn off. So sometimes I think people get lured into a false sense of security with hearing dogs, and they're much more careful with deaf dogs. So, Bubble we had rules about how far, if we went on the beach, for example, and the tide was in, so we couldn't go too far down, she didn't go off the lead because we were too close to the road. When we were at the park, we had a distance that I knew that I could call her back from, and we didn't go past that distance towards the gate. Because although she was really good, we had to have a margin of error for something to get her attention. I did teach her all the things like, you see this cue, this person, this dog, this squirrel, whatever, is a cue to look at me, and do another check-in. So basically, a lot of her recalls were her choice. She would see and look back to me instead. And then I could tell her, yes, you can go and greet them, or you can come back here, with just the normal hand signals that we used. So yeah, with recalls, it's very much knowing your dog. Starting off with security, so a long line, secure field, and just building up how far you let them go before you do a recall, and see what kind of margin of error you need. But deaf dogs can be very, very good at recall.
You also just hit on something as well that I never really thought about. Yes, I think people, we take more. We're going to be more. If I had a dog that was deaf, I would be very, very. Oh God, I wouldn't let that dog out of my sight. Yeah, but my dog that I have who has hearing, I take that for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I can see you're right. If there is a distraction, and that distraction is such a distraction that they are switching off, yeah, the deaf dog has nothing to switch off.
Mm.
So they can be fully um, focused upon what they are interacting with visually. So, yeah, I certainly see that there's a very good need for long lines used properly, appropriately, secure fields where you can get some consistency of building that relationship, that bond, so things become a little bit more reflexive from the dog's point of view, checking in wise. And then, yeah, the hearing dog, we will always take for granted, I think.
Yeah. And actually, I had a hearing dog who I did so much training with, and I could have him on a long line in a secure field, absolutely perfect. And we'd be playing engaging games and he would be totally in it. It wasn't the long line, it was that he was on it and he was loving it. And you gently unclipped that long line and off he went. And he completely switched off. And I never got him to a point where I would trust him off the lead properly. And her recall for Bubble was just brilliant. He was the one that had to stay on the lead
Yeah,
while she was off. So it's very much an individual thing.
yeah. Okay, so we have got our field, we sort of set out a plan. Is there anything that we should be also looking to work with regarding dogs that are deaf? I know if a dog was blind, it'd be slightly different. There's going to be more input, more involved. But is there anything, I mean, is there anything training wise that we can teach them to just, I don't know, what's the word? What am I looking for? That can support them, yeah, in feeling comfortable. And I'm more gearing here now to the dog that once had hearing, but no
Okay.
longer has hearing.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do with both types of dogs. One of the main things, it is more puppies. It's important to do it with older dogs that go deaf, but a little bit more difficult is to
Okay.
teach startle response.
Okay.
So obviously, one of the big reasons that dogs bite is when they're startled and taken by surprise. And that's why in times gone by, people have said that deaf dogs are more likely to be aggressive. Or at least part of the reason people have said that. And you will never stop surprising a deaf dog. It doesn't matter how many times you teach them how to respond to being startled. They will still be startled. It's just how they respond to being startled that's important. Obviously, you need to teach yourself as well not to startle them unnecessarily, and how you can make them. It's not so much a training thing, but it's making them aware of your presence before you do take them by surprise. A lot of dogs, for example, if you stamp on the floor, will know that you're there. That kind of thing. Sometimes having a bit of airflow through the room before, if they're asleep, for example, and you're going to wake them up as you go past, trying to have a bit of airflow through, or sometimes just putting a treat down near their nose so that they wake up sniffing that, rather than startled that you're there, can help. But also teaching that startle response, so that when, obviously with older dogs, you've got to be a bit more careful. Puppies generally are quite malleable. When you'd start off when they're not completely unaware of you with the older dog, just sort of touching them behind and having a treat ready or a toy, whatever they prefer the most, so that when they do spin round and see that you're there, they get something great straight away. And I, obviously with puppies, it's really easy because you can just you don't want to surprise them too often and sensitize them, but it's much easier to do. And I once had a vet nurse say to me, "Oh, you're going to have to work more with this puppy because she still startles when you take her by surprise." And I said, "Well, yeah, but has she bitten you?" And she said, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter how many times you come up behind me and shout boo, I'm still going to startle. But if you give me a piece of chocolate every time, I won't punch you in the face." Yeah. So it's very, very similar. It's giving them that expectation of, I'm startled, something good is coming, instead of turning to defend themselves. So that's one of the first things. What was the other thing I was going to mention? Obviously, hopefully by the time an older dog that has been well socialized starts to go deaf, they're very good at body language and everything else already. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue with other dogs, because they don't rely that much on, the sounds coming from another dog. Do need to be a little bit aware, if your dog is going deaf, that they're not going to respond to a dog giving them a warning growl. So there are situations where you have to intervene and call your dog away, and get your dog away. You can't call your dog away, but because they are pestering another dog that is growling at them, and they might not be looking at them to know that. Right. That being said, I mean, we did come up against a dog once that my dog really wasn't very happy with. He was very, very big and boisterous, and he was in her face, and the owner was saying, "Oh, he's deaf. She doesn't know she's growling." I was like, he knows that she's growling. It's all in the face. It's not the sound. But there are situations where they're not looking at each other and they can't hear that there's a warning growl going on. And then one thing that you can use, because they have such a great sense of it, is scent. So, teach them to track you. Don't use extra smells. You don't need to be using extra oils and scents and things to teach a deaf dog, or any dog really, to scent, because it's such a strong sense anyway. Just if you teach them to track you, to do scent games, because we know it's good for dogs anyway. Then if you are on a walk and they do go a little bit missing, which Bubble used to do, she used to go into the undergrowth and reappear somewhere else, I was able to just carry on going, and she'd find me because she could track me.
Right.
So it's a really good way of not losing them.
That sounds a very, very good idea, because as you were mentioning using scent, I was visualizing me training, working with a dog, and getting them to track my scent back. So as they're sniffing, I can, follow the footsteps. I was just, as I walk away, pulling back to me, and then rewarding them for sniffing the ground and following that scent. That's a very, very good idea. I don't know many people that might, unless they work in that field, have been able to pinpoint using scent as well. So what you are saying is puppies are more trainable, because puppies are just so excitable when they're young. I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
They kind of, it's that age-old thing, isn't it? Teaching an old dog new tricks. You can, but we know that puppies are easier.
Yeah. Much, much easier. And going back to the startle response, that's where a torch, like you said you use, would come in handy. So if a dog was laying down facing away from you, the light shining on the door as they and reward them for seeing the light, you'll probably give them the association that you're there. I think
Yeah.
after a few competitions, they
Some
will.
people, some people will just turn the room lights on and off a couple of times,
Yeah.
and that'll do it. Bubble actually used reflections a lot. I don't know
Hmm.
how common that is, but she did have some visual stimuli issues,
Hmm.
but she actually taught herself to, if she was having a chew, I lived in a multi-dog household, and they weren't necessarily very good at sharing. So she would position herself with a chew in a space where she could see from a picture frame or the TV or something who was behind her.
Hmm.
And if she was out, I can't really explain the angle, but if she was outside and the door was open, the glass in it would reflect inside,
Yeah.
and you could wave to the glass and she would know that you were waving and she'd be able to see you and come back in. So they do, because they are so much more visual, they do tend to pick these things up.
Yeah. I can believe that because you just brought my memory back to last year where I was working with a dog that once he saw the reflection in the glass, whether it's the back door, the kitchen door had glass, he went berserk.
Yeah.
So we had to, in fact, we actually used scent work to teach
Mm,
him something new. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, don't know why.
Unfortunately, there are a large amount of deaf dogs that do struggle with visual stimuli.
Yeah. So, okay. So what you are saying is that really having a dog that has no hearing um, isn't really that difficult to live with and help them to coexist in their world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, we have to take some precautions. And you gave a very good example there. If they are with another dog but looking away and that dog is growling, they will not be aware of that unless they look
Mm,
back. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I would definitely say, yeah, I could see why an owner would have to be vigilant and to be careful, very careful. So, would you ever say to an owner, um, okay, yeah, you're at the park, would you let your dog off the lead and go play with all these dogs? Or would you tell them to be cautious?
It would have to depend on the dog.
Dog.
It would have to absolutely depend on the dog. Bubble did. I used to walk the dogs in a large group of people, not all the time, but we used to meet up and there'd be a large group of dogs. Bubble could navigate that no problem whatsoever. She was very, very good at body language. And I didn't have to worry about her. Obviously, you'd still watch your dog. And I'm vigilant with hearing dogs because not all interactions go according to plan, you know.
Yeah.
But I had no qualms about letting her play in a group of dogs, as long as the group of dogs was the right group of dogs and she was in the right mood, all the same things as a hearing dog.
Okay.
Then yeah, but there will be dogs that doesn't work for.
Yeah, so it really comes back down to something we all know as professionals. Uh, it depends the dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from an owner point of view, if anyone's watching this, yeah, just be aware of how well you know and understand your own dog before you allow them to take extra steps. Because I would imagine if a dog has had no good social upbringing around other dogs, that could be a disaster.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing to consider is that they cannot hear you yell at them. So there was a situation. Bubble was honestly soft as anything, and she was really, really good at managing interactions with other dogs. But with my own bitch at home, there were two girls together, and she hit she hit adolescence, and things went a little bit sideways. To the point where at one point I did think one of them was going to have to live somewhere else, and I was just devastated. They did get over it. They did live together for the rest of their lives without continuing to fight, but we did have a couple of nasty fights.
Mhm.
And of course, the first time it happened, and it wasn't actually Bubble that started it, but she was very good at finishing it. I yelled because you do, and the other dog backed off. and Bubble had no idea that I'd yelled. So there is that, you have to be in there and really getting hold of them, because she's not going to look at you in the middle of an argument, and she's not going to hear you. So that's the only thing to be aware of. I don't think that that's a reason to not let a well-socialized dog interact with dogs on a regular basis. But you do have to be aware that they're not going to be shouted out of it if something kicks off.
So if someone is watching and they got a dog that they are fully aware that has no hearing, uh, what's the best, or is there an organisation they can contact for support?
So we're at the Deaf Dog Network. It's UK based, but we do have a lot of international members as well. Karen Law started the Deaf Dog Network to raise awareness and has done an extremely good job of it. A lot of displays and things at public shows and stuff like that. But we're now mostly on the Facebook group. She's also got a Facebook page and she puts a lot of educational stuff up. And basically in the group, you can come in and ask questions. There's a whole wealth of files with information about training and raising puppies and things like that, and associated issues. So the Deaf Dog Network Facebook group is where you'll find us. There's quite a few publications and things now as well.
And if someone wanted to work with you personally online, how would they contact you?
You can get in touch with me via, I've got a new Facebook page, which is Thank You Spot. I think it's TYS Dog as the, facebook.com/TYS. Sorry, TYS Spot or TYS Dog, I think. It's that new. Or just through Lottie Bennett on Facebook.
Okay.
They can contact me either way.
Okay, Lottie, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
You've pointed out some points that I would never have thought about. This industry is such that there are so many of us, but we all have our own little niches, things that we're good at, things we understand. Working with deaf, blind dogs is not what I do. I don't truly understand it. Not stupid, but don't fully understand it in the way you do. So thank you for talking to us today. There's some very good tips and some good advice in there. And
I think the main thing is, if you do get a puppy that turns out to be deaf or a dog that goes deaf, it's not. Yes, it makes things a little bit more challenging. There are some things with puppy, toilet training and like nipping and things like that can be more difficult, but it isn't a reason to panic, because they are very much dogs first.
Mm-hmm. And plus, they have the Deaf Dog Network and people like yourself that they can make contact with. So, Lottie, once again, thank you for coming along and talking to us. We could actually go into this more depth in the future, and come up with some other bits and pieces we can ask you and talk to you about. So, thank you for coming. For everyone, that's it from myself and Lottie today at Dogs Do Speak. Please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the content that we put out in the future. Until the next time, it's goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.